He, a widowed and powerful magnate, yet lonely and withdrawn, urgently needed a nanny for his sensitive son. She, a young woman, 7 months pregnant, abandoned and with nowhere to go, forced to sleep on the streets. One cold morning, he sees her on a park bench in despair. Moved by a surge of compassion, he hires her as his son's nanny. He immediately takes her to his mansion, offering her a home, medical care, and safety. Liv's sweetness wins over Leo, and without him realizing it himself, he falls in love. Prepare for a plot twist where the magnate and the nanny, who slept on the streets, will face scandal and social pressure. But true love will prove that family is built with affection and acceptance, not status. Watch this story until the end. You will be surprised by this story. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing, the icy June wind cut through her skin like invisible blades, and Liv Moore pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself. 7 months of pregnancy weighed heavily on her aching back as she settled onto the park bench, trying to find a position that would ease the pressure on her belly. Her stomach had been growling for hours, a cruel reminder that her last meal had been a day-old bagel shared with a couple of pigeons the morning before. 3 nights. 3 nights sleeping rough, ever since she discovered that Rick had vanished with everything. Her savings, her dreams, her trust. The rented apartment was no longer hers. The overdue bills piled up like an insurmountable mountain. And family, well, family had made it clear that a single pregnant daughter wasn't welcome back in rural Pennsylvania. "You made your bed, Liv," her mother had said over the phone, her voice as harsh as stone. "Now lie in it." Liv closed her eyes and tried to feel the baby move, a small proof that there was still hope in the world. The gentle flutter against her ribs brought a sad smile to her face. At least they still had each other. A few miles away, Victor Caldwell adjusted his Italian silk tie as his armored Cadillac glided through the streets of Manhattan. The black leather of the back seat was cool against his back, but he barely noticed. His mind was already on the 9 o'clock meeting, the performance charts, the investments that would move millions before lunch. "Mr. Caldwell," said Carl, his driver of over 10 years. "Traffic's heavier than usual today. We might be 15 minutes late." Victor nodded, typing a response on his cell phone. At 39, he had built an empire of investments and technology that placed him among the wealthiest men in the country. Every minute was worth a fortune. Every decision impacted hundreds of jobs. It was a responsibility he carried with the same loneliness that had haunted him since Helen died. "Is Daddy coming home today?" Leo had asked the night before, his big, hopeful eyes fixed on his father. "Of course, champ," Victor had replied, tousling the boy's brown hair. "Daddy always comes home." But coming home meant returning to the emptiness, to the mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, where every room echoed with memories of Helen, where Leo played in silence, where the housekeepers whispered about the need for a mother figure in the child's life. The last nanny had quit the week before, the third in 6 months. "The boy needs stability, Mr. Caldwell," she had said. "He needs someone who will stay." The red light forced him to stop right in front of the small park. Victor looked up from his phone, annoyed by the delay, when he saw her. A young woman huddled on the bench like an injured bird. Even from a distance, it was impossible not to notice the prominent belly beneath her worn jacket, the pale face, the brown hair disheveled by the wind, the posture that mixed dignity and despair in a way that hit him like a punch to the gut. Something in her expression, a raw vulnerability that echoed the very pain he carried, made Victor forget all about the meeting. "Carl," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Pull over." "Sir?" "Pull over. Now!" Liv didn't even notice the black Cadillac stopping at the curb. She was too focused on not crying, on maintaining the composure that was all she had left. Only when a shadow blocked the weak morning sun did she look up. A tall man, in an impeccable suit and with intense dark eyes, was watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. For an insane moment, she thought she was dreaming, Men like that didn't stop to talk to women like her. "Excuse me," he said, his deep voice carrying a refined East Coast accent. "Are you all right?" The simplest question in the world. 3 words that carried the weight of a miracle that Liv had stopped expecting. Liv blinked several times, certain that hunger was causing hallucinations. Men in $1,000 suits didn't approach pregnant women sleeping on park benches, not in the real world. She began, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Sorry, are you talking to me?" Victor took a step forward, and she could see the details that confirmed her suspicions. The watch that probably cost more than a car, the Italian leather shoes, the impeccable haircut. He didn't belong there, just as she didn't belong in his world. "Yes, I'm talking to you," he said, and there was something in his dark eyes that made her feel less invisible. "Are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" The concern in his voice was real, not the condescending pity she had learned to recognize. Liv tried to straighten up on the bench, a pathetic attempt to maintain her dignity. "I'm fine, thank you. Just resting." Resting? Victor looked around, the practically deserted park, the biting wind, the cold concrete bench. Here, the tone wasn't accusatory, just confused, as if he genuinely couldn't understand how anyone would choose that place to rest. And that was where the abyss between them lay. For him, it was inconceivable. For her, it was the only option. "Look, mister." Liv struggled to get up, her trembling hands resting on the bench. "I'm not asking for money or anything like that. I just want to be left alone." "Wait." Victor instinctively reached out when she faltered, but stopped halfway, as if remembering some invisible barrier between them. "When was the last time you ate?" The direct question caught her off guard. Liv tried to lie, opened her mouth to say that she had eaten recently, but the words simply wouldn't come out. Instead, tears threatened to spill, and she bit her lower lip to contain them. "It's none of your business," she murmured. But the response sounded more vulnerable than defensive. Victor was silent for a moment, studying her. There was something about this woman that awakened a primal protectiveness he hadn't felt since Helen. It was dangerous. It was complicated. It was everything he had learned to avoid. "What's your name?" he asked, ignoring the voice of reason screaming at him to get back in the car. "Liv." The answer came out automatically before she could censor herself. "Liv." He repeated it as if testing the sound. "I'm Victor, and I have a strange proposition for you." She stared at him, suspicious. "What kind of proposition?" "I need a nanny for my son. He's 6 years old. He's a special child, difficult to handle. The last nanny quit last week." Victor paused, seeming surprised by his own words. "Would you be interested?" Liv almost laughed at the irony. "You're offering a job to a pregnant woman you found sleeping on the street. I'm offering a job to someone who clearly needs it and who—" Victor hesitated, searching for the right words. "Who has kind eyes. My son needs kindness." "You don't even know me. I could be dangerous, unstable, anything." "Could be," he agreed, "but you're not." The certainty in his voice was disconcerting. Liv felt the baby kick, as if it too was surprised by the turn of events. "I don't have references, formal experience," she began, but Victor interrupted her. "Do you have children?" "I'm going to." She touched her belly instinctively. "Then you have the only experience that matters." He took a card from his inside coat pocket. "Think about it. The salary is good, room and board are included, and my son needs someone who understands what it's like to feel lost." Liv took the card with trembling fingers. The paper was thick, expensive, with gold-embossed lettering. Victor Caldwell, CEO, Caldwell Investments. Just looking at it made her feel even more inadequate. "Mr. Caldwell," she began. "Victor," he corrected automatically, then seemed surprised that he had done so. Victor. The name sounded strange in her mouth. Too intimate. "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, There was a fragility in his voice that contrasted with the facade of power. Because sometimes we all need a second chance. His cell phone rang, breaking the moment. Victor answered with a curt, "Caldwell," and Liv could hear an agitated voice on the other end, talking about meetings and impatient investors. "I have to go," he said, hanging up. "But I want you to know the offer is real. Call this number if you want to talk more." He was already walking away when he turned around one last time. "Liv, go get something to eat, please." She watched him get into the luxury car and disappear into traffic, leaving her alone with a card that seemed to have fallen from another universe. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if approving the crazy proposal. 3 hours later, when the hunger became unbearable and the cold began to ache in her bones, Liv found a payphone and dialed the number on the card. Her hands were shaking so badly that she misdialed twice. On the third try, a female voice answered, "Caldwell Investments, good morning. I would like to speak to Mr. Victor Caldwell, please. It's about the nanny position." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "One moment, please." The mansion in Greenwich was everything Liv had imagined and nothing she expected at the same time. Imposing, with impeccable gardens and an architecture that screamed wealth. But there was something melancholic in the excessive perfection, like a museum where real people had stopped living. "Leo's in his room," Victor explained, guiding her through the marble hall. "He hasn't reacted well to changes. Since his mother died 3 years ago, he's become very withdrawn." Liv nodded, trying to process the information while absorbing the details around her. Expensive paintings on the walls, a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than she would earn in a lifetime, and a silence that seemed to swallow any sound. "How did she die?" she asked softly. Victor stopped in the middle of the staircase, his hand tightening on the mahogany railing. "Car accident, coming back from a doctor's appointment." His voice grew softer. "She was 3 months pregnant." The weight of those words hit Liv like a wave. She instinctively brought her hand to her own belly, feeling a painful connection to the tragedy that haunted this house. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, and Victor seemed to perceive the genuine sincerity in her voice. "Leo doesn't know about the baby," he said, continuing to climb. "I thought it would be too hard for him." They stopped in front of a door decorated with dinosaur stickers. Victor knocked lightly. "Leo, there's someone here I want you to meet." "I don't want to meet anyone," came the muffled response from the other side. Victor and Liv exchanged a look. She could see the frustration and worry in his eyes, a vulnerability that contrasted completely with the powerful businessman she had met in the park. "Can I try?" she whispered. He hesitated, then nodded and stepped back a few paces. Liv knelt down in front of the door, ignoring the pain in her back. "Hi, Leo. My name is Liv. Your dad told me you like dinosaurs." Silence. "You know, I have a baby here in my belly," she continued, tapping lightly on the wood. "And sometimes I talk to him about things I'm learning. This morning I was wondering which dinosaur you think would be the best dad." There was a noise from the other side of the door, as if someone was approaching. "Probably the Maiasaura," came the small voice, still wary. "They took really good care of their babies." Liv smiled, feeling a small victory. "Oh, I don't know that one. Could you tell me about it?" The door opened a crack, revealing a boy with dark hair and big eyes, a miniature version of Victor, but with a sadness that no child should carry. "They made huge nests and brought food to the babies," Leo said, still clinging to the doorknob, "and they protected them from other mean dinosaurs." "Just like your dad protects you," Liv said gently. Leo looked at Victor, then at Liv's prominent belly. "Is the baby going to be born?" "Yes, it is. In about 2 months, more or less." "Mommy was going to have a baby," Leo said suddenly, making Victor stiffen. "But she went away and took the baby with her." The silence that followed was devastating. Liv felt tears stinging her eyes as she looked at Victor, who was as pale as a sheet. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "mummies have to go to a place very far away, even if they don't want to leave their children, but that doesn't mean they don't love you." "Are you going away too?" Leo asked. And there was so much fear in the question that Liv's heart broke. "I'm not going away, Leo. I promise." The words came out before she could stop them, charged with a conviction that surprised her. Leo studied her face for a long moment, as if searching for signs of a lie. "Do you want to see my dinosaur collection?" he asked finally. "I'd love to." Later, when Leo was asleep after 2 hours of showing her every toy dinosaur and telling his favorite stories, Victor and Liv met in the spacious kitchen. She was making tea while he watched, still processing how a stranger had accomplished in one afternoon what trained nannies hadn't managed in months. "How did you know what to say?" he asked. Liv shrugged, pouring the tea. "Personal experience, I guess. My dad left us when I was 8 years old. My mom always said he had gone to work in another state, but I knew he just didn't want to stay anymore." "And how did you deal with it?" "I didn't deal with it well," she admitted, sitting down at the granite table. "I spent years thinking I had done something wrong, that if I were a better daughter, he would have stayed." Victor sat down opposite her, a safe distance, but one that seemed smaller with every minute they spent talking. "Leo thinks the same thing about Helen," he said quietly. "On the last day, they argued because he didn't want to clean his room. Her last words to him were a scolding. And you carry the guilt too." It wasn't a question. Liv could see it in the way he held his cup, in the tension in his shoulders, in the way his eyes avoided hers. "If I hadn't scheduled so many meetings that week, she wouldn't have gone to the doctor alone," he said. "If I had paid more attention, realized that she was too tired to drive." "Victor." Liv reached out instinctively, touching his fingers lightly on the table. The contact was electric, unexpected. "Accidents happen. It wasn't your fault." He looked at where their hands touched, a simple connection that carried a disproportionate weight. "Rick also said it wasn't his fault," she said suddenly, withdrawing her hand. "When he found out about the pregnancy, when he vanished with the money, when he left me on the street, there was always a justification. I'm not him." The statement came firm, almost possessive, and Liv felt something stir in her chest, a dangerous sensation that she had sworn never to feel again. "No," she agreed, studying his face. "You're not." The baby chose that moment to give a particularly strong kick, causing her to wince and put her hands on her belly. "Are you okay?" Victor leaned forward, concerned. "I'm fine. He's just pretty active at night." She laughed softly. "I think he's going to be a football player." "Can I?" Victor hesitated, his hand half extended towards her belly. Liv was paralyzed. It was too intimate. It crossed all the lines she had drawn in her head. But there was something in his expression, a longing so deep that it made her nod. When his large, warm palm touched her belly, the baby kicked again, as if recognizing the touch. Victor smiled, the first real smile she had seen on him. And for a moment, both of them forgot who they were, where they came from, the chasms that separated them. "Helen always said she wanted a girl," he murmured, his hand still on Liv's belly. "Said Leo needed a sister to protect." It was the first time he spoke of Helen in the present tense, as if she was still there with them. Liv felt a strange pang. It wasn't jealousy, it was something more complex, a mixture of compassion and a desire to fill a void that might be impossible to fill. "Maybe he still will," she said impulsively, then blushed violently as she realized the implication of the words. Victor stared at her, and there was something dangerous glinting in his dark eyes, something that promised complications that neither of them was prepared to face. The first month in the mansion had established a delicate routine. Liv took care of Leo during the day, teaching him math through games with dinosaurs and reading stories that made him laugh for the first time in years. Victor arrived at 7 in the evening. The three of them had dinner together, a strange simulation of a family that everyone pretended was natural. And then he locked himself in his office until late. It was a careful dance of closeness and distance, of glances that lasted a second longer than necessary, and conversations that stopped abruptly when they became too intimate. Everything changed one Thursday in July, when a strong contraction made Liv double over in the middle of the playroom. "Aunt Liv," Leo dropped his Legos and ran to her, his eyes wide with fear. What happened? "It's okay, honey," she gasped, trying to breathe through the pain. Just a cramp." But it wasn't a cramp. The pain radiated through her back and abdomen with an intensity that made her dizzy. At 8 months pregnant, she knew exactly what it meant. "Leo, honey, you need to call your dad now." The boy, with a heartbreaking maturity, picked up the cordless phone and dialed the number for his father's office, a number he had memorized for emergencies. "Dad, Aunt Liv is hurting. She's making a pain face like that time I broke my arm." Liv could hear Victor's altered voice on the other end of the line, a flurry of questions that Leo tried to answer between nervous sobs. "He said to call Dr. Baker," Leo said, hanging up, "and that he's coming home now." 15 minutes. Victor crossed the city in 15 minutes, leaving a meeting with Japanese investors in the middle of a $20 million presentation. He found Liv on the living room sofa, breathing in short patterns while Leo held her hand, humming softly a song she used to sing to him. "How are you?" Victor knelt beside her, touching her forehead with an intimacy that hadn't existed even that morning. "I think it's labor," she whispered. "But it's too early. There are still 4 weeks left." The panic that flashed through his eyes lasted only a second, soon replaced by the determination that made him one of the most respected businessmen in the country. "Dr. Baker is on his way. The car is ready." He looked at Leo. "Champ, you're going to stay with Mrs. Davis while I take Aunt Liv to the hospital, okay?" "No." Leo's response was immediate and desperate. "I want to go too. What if she goes away like Mommy did?" The silence that followed was tense. Liv, even through the pain, saw Victor struggling with memories that still bled. "Leo," she said with effort, squeezing his small hand, "remember our conversation about the Maya Sora, how they protected their babies?" The boy nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Your dad is my Maya Sora now. He's going to protect me and I'm coming back. I promise." "With the baby?" "With the baby." Victor picked her up, a gesture that should have been purely practical, but that sent waves of heat through her body, even in the middle of the contractions. She nestled against his chest, inhaling the expensive cologne mixed with the scent of worry and adrenaline. In the car, with their hands intertwined almost without realizing it, the reality of the situation hit them. "Victor," she said between contractions, "if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen. Listen, if something happens, I want you to adopt the baby officially. Don't let him go back to my family. They won't love him like I will," he finished, and the words came out charged with a truth that surprised them. She stared at him, seeing in those dark eyes not just the concern of an employer, but something much deeper and more dangerous. "Victor, I know," he said softly. "I feel it too." The confession hung between them like a promise and a threat. They were crossing a line that would make it impossible to pretend that this was just a business arrangement. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and urgent voices. Dr. Baker, a 60-year-old man with gentle hands, examined Liv while Victor paced the room like a caged animal. "It's premature labor," confirmed the doctor. "We'll try to slow it down, but if we can't, the baby has a good chance. 8 months is viable." "And her?" Victor stopped pacing, his voice tight. "She'll be fine, but she needs support. Someone close, trustworthy." During the 16 hours that followed, Victor didn't leave her side. He held her hand during the strongest contractions, whispered words of encouragement when she wanted to give up, and faced doctors and nurses with the authority of someone accustomed to having control over every situation. "I can't do this," she murmured during a particularly violent contraction. At 3 in the morning, "I'm not strong enough." "You're the strongest woman I know," said Victor, kissing her sweaty forehead. "You survived on the streets pregnant, won over my son, made me believe I could love again. You can do anything." The words came out before he could censor them, raw and true. "Do you love me?" she asked, her eyes glazed with pain and hope. "Like crazy," he admitted. "For weeks. Since that night in the kitchen when you touched my hand. Maybe since the first day in the park." Michael was born at 5:47 in the morning, small but perfect, with powerful lungs that announced his arrival to the world. When the nurse placed the baby in Liv's arms, Victor felt something break definitively inside his chest. "He's beautiful," he whispered, touching delicately the small head covered in dark hair. "Do you want to hold him?" Liv smiled, exhausted but radiant. When Victor took Michael in his arms, the baby calmed down immediately, as if recognizing the voice he had heard for weeks. At that moment, looking at the woman he loved and the son he already felt was his, Victor made a decision that would change everything. "Marry me," he said, the words coming out more like a statement than a request. "Victor, not as a nanny, as family. I want to wake up every day knowing that you two are safe, that Leo has a mother and Michael has a father. I want..." He paused, searching for courage. "I want us to be a real family." Liv was silent for so long that he thought he had misinterpreted everything, that he had confused gratitude with love. "What about Helen?" she asked finally. "Helen will always be part of our story," he said with painful honesty. "But you're my gift, my future." She reached out, touching his face with trembling fingers. "Yes," she whispered. But outside the room, a gossipy nurse had already called an acquaintance who worked in the press. The news that magnate Victor Caldwell had spent the night in the hospital with a pregnant woman, a woman who was definitely not his deceased wife, would be tabloid headlines by the end of the week. And Rick, seeing the photo of Liv in the newspapers, finally found out where to find her. Happiness lasted exactly 5 days. Liv was breastfeeding Michael in the room that Victor had transformed into a maternity suite, with an imported mahogany crib, an Italian nursing chair, and a monitoring system that cost more than a compact car. When Leo burst through the door, holding a tablet with a confused expression. "Aunt Liv, why is there a picture of you in the newspaper?" Her blood ran cold. With trembling hands, she took the tablet and saw the headline that would destroy everything. "Magnate Victor Caldwell hides romance with pregnant street nanny." The photo was terrible. Her entering the hospital supported by Victor, her face contorted in pain, looking exactly what the article insinuated, an opportunist who had gotten pregnant to take advantage of a wealthy and vulnerable man. "Oh my God," she murmured, reading the first lines that dissected her life like a spectacle. The young Liv Moore, 28, was found by the businessman sleeping in a public park 2 months ago. Sources close to the Caldwell family confirm that she infiltrated the mansion as a nanny and quickly seduced the inconsolable widower, Aunt Liv. Leo touched her arm, worried. "Why are you crying?" Before she could answer, Victor appeared in the doorway, his face livid and a crumpled newspaper in his hand. "Leo, go play in your room, now." The tone brooked no argument. The boy left reluctantly, and Victor closed the door, locking them in a tense silence. "How did they find out?" asked Liv, her voice broken. "Someone at the hospital talked." Victor paused, running his hands through his hair. "My family has always had spies. My sister-in-law, Sandra, never accepted that I didn't marry the candidate she chose." "What candidate?" "Camila Vasconcelos, daughter of a company partner, business degree, impeccable pedigree." He said it bitterly. "The perfect marriage to consolidate business and maintain appearances." Victor's phone rang. He looked at the screen and grimaced. "Sandra," he said, answering. What a surprise. Liv could hear her sister-in-law's shrill voice through the phone, a torrent of angry words about scandals, the family's reputation and responsibility to Leo. "It's none of your business, Sandra," Victor replied coldly, "and I suggest you don't interfere in..." The voice on the other end got louder, more venomous. Victor hung up abruptly. "She wants me to marry Camilla as soon as possible to fix my public image," he said, "and to send you away before it affects the business." "Maybe she's right," Liv murmured, looking at Michael sleeping in her arms. "Maybe I should leave." "No," the answer came immediately, almost violently. "You're not going anywhere. We're a family now." "A family?" Liv laughed humorlessly. "Victor, look at this." She pointed to the tablet. They're saying I prostituted myself for a better life, that I used my son to blackmail you. How can this be a family? Because I love you, he exploded. Because Leo loves you. Because Michael needs you. Because for the first time in 3 years this house feels like a home. The words echoed in the room, raw and desperate. Liv felt tears burning in her eyes. "And I love you too," she whispered. "But love isn't enough when the whole world wants to tear us apart." The phone rang again. This time it was Richard, a senior partner in the firm. "Victor, I need you to come to the office. Now. We have a situation." An hour later, Victor was sitting in the executive boardroom, facing 5 men in suits who had helped him build his empire and who now looked at him as if he had gone insane. "The shareholders are nervous," said Richard, throwing a pile of newspapers on the table. "The stock is down 3% this morning alone. The Japanese investors are questioning your emotional stability. My personal life doesn't affect my ability to—" "Yes, it does," interrupted Dr. Ellis, the family lawyer for 20 years. "Especially when that personal life includes a woman of dubious origins who may be using you." "Be careful," Victor stood up, his voice dangerously low. "Be very careful what you say about her." "Victor, be rational," said Sandra, who had appeared like an elegant harpy. "You've known this woman for 2 months. She appeared out of nowhere, pregnant, desperate, and suddenly she's living in your house, controlling your son, having access to your finances. She doesn't have access to my finances. Not yet. But what about when you get married? What if she asks for child support? What if—" Sandra paused dramatically. "What if she's recording conversations, collecting evidence for a future lawsuit?" The suggestion was absurd, but Victor felt a seed of doubt being planted. Not about Liv's character, but about how the world would always see them. "There's a solution," said Dr. Ellis carefully. "Camilla is still interested. A quick, discreet marriage would solve all the problems. We would settle the situation with Liv generously. She would have financial security, the son would have a future, and you would preserve your reputation." "You're talking about buying the woman I love." "We're talking about protecting everything you've built," retorted Sandra, "and protecting Leo from more trauma. Do you think it's fair to expose that boy to this media circus?" It was the mention of Leo that shook Victor. The idea of his son being chased by paparazzi, having to explain at school about the pregnant nanny who became a stepmother. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Liv received an unexpected visitor. Rick was at the front door when she came downstairs with Michael in her arms, more handsome and charming than ever, smiling as if he hadn't disappeared with all her savings. "Hi, baby," he said casually. "You look different. Motherhood suits you." "What do you want, Rick?" Liv positioned herself to protect Michael, her heart pounding. "I want to meet my son." "Your son?" She laughed bitterly. "You disappeared when you found out about the pregnancy. You have no right to him." "Yes, I do. I'm the biological father." Rick took a paper out of his pocket. "And here's the paternity test I did. DNA matching perfectly." Liv felt the world spin. "What test? How did you—" "I got a sample when he was born. I have my contacts at the hospital." Rick smiled coldly. "And now, seeing in the newspapers that you've done very well for yourself, I think I can be a more present father, especially if your new protector is willing to invest in the child's well-being. You're blackmailing me. I'm proposing a partnership. You keep living your princess life. I receive a small monthly compensation for my son, and everyone's happy. And if I refuse," Rick shrugged, "then I'll exercise my parental rights. Child support, visitation, maybe even joint custody. I imagine how the press will react when they find out that the baby that magnate Victor Caldwell is raising as his son actually belongs to another man." Liv held Michael tighter, feeling the walls of her new life collapsing around her. "How much do you want?" $50,000 a month, a bargain for a man in your employer's position. He's not my employer. No? Then what is he? Because according to the newspapers, you're still just the nanny he took to bed. Rick leaned closer. And nannies can be fired. When Victor arrived home that night, he found Liv packing her clothes in the room they had shared for only 5 nights. "What are you doing?" he asked, still shaken by the meeting. "What I should have done from the beginning," she said without looking at him. "Leaving. Because of the newspapers? Liv, it'll pass." "It won't pass, Victor, and you know it." She finally turned to him, her eyes red from crying. "Your family is right. I'm a risk to everything you've built. My family doesn't decide my life." "Yes, they do, and they should. Leo needs stability, not more scandal." Liv closed the suitcase, her hands trembling. "And I have my own problems to solve." She didn't tell him about Rick. She couldn't. His blackmail would involve Victor in an even more sordid situation, and she had already caused enough damage. "Liv, please, let me go, Victor. If you really love me, let me go." Liv had underestimated Rick's determination. 3 days after leaving the mansion, 3 days living in a cheap motel downtown, using the money that Victor had insisted on giving her for emergencies, she woke up to Michael crying and the television in the next room blaring at full volume. In a new twist in the Caldwell scandal, we've discovered that the baby that the magnate was raising as his son is not his. The real father, Rick Santos, 32, is desperately seeking to recover the son who was kidnapped by his ex-girlfriend. Liv sat up in bed as if she had been shot. With trembling hands, she turned on the TV in her room and saw herself on the screen. An old photo from when she was still with Rick, both smiling in a restaurant. The article was even worse than the first. Santos claims that Moore disappeared when she found out she was pregnant, preventing him from assuming his parental responsibilities. "I wanted to marry her, give our son a family," Santos declared last night. "But when I found her living with Mr. Caldwell, she refused to let me see the child." The tears came, even before she finished processing the magnitude of the lie. Rick had transformed everything, the abandonment, the theft, the blackmail, into a story where he was the victim and she, the villain who kidnapped children from loving parents. The phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Liv Moore?" The voice was professional, cold. "This is legal aid. Mr. Rick Santos has filed for custody. You need to appear at a hearing on Monday." She hung up and immediately called Victor. It rang, voicemail. She tried 5 more times. Always voicemail. Victor was in his office on the 40th floor, watching the phone ring and feeling his heart break with every ring he ignored. Beside him, Dr. Ellis flipped through documents with the satisfaction of someone who had predicted exactly that scenario. "See, I told you there was something strange about this whole story," murmured the lawyer. "A desperate woman, a baby that's not yours. She was planning this from the beginning." "She wasn't planning anything," Victor said softly, but his voice lacked the conviction of before. "Victor, open your eyes. She knew you were a widower, vulnerable, lonely. She appeared in the right place at the right time, with exactly the story most calculated to awaken your compassion. And when the real father showed up, she ran away." "She didn't run away. I let her go." "Because you knew, deep down, that something was wrong." Victor closed his eyes, remembering the last days with Liv. The smiles, the kisses, the way she sighed his name when they made love. Had it all been a lie? "The stock is up 2% since the news that you're not involved with the child was released," continued Dr. Ellis. "The investors are relieved. Camilla gave a lovely interview this morning, defending you and talking about how you're longtime friends. I don't want to marry Camilla. You don't want to marry anyone right now. But think of Leo. Think of the company. Think of what Helen would want you to do." The mention of his dead wife was a low blow that worked. Helen had always been pragmatic, always thought of Leo first. Would she have approved of a woman like Liv? A woman who had lied about the paternity of her son, who had brought scandal and instability into the boy's life. That night, Leo appeared in Victor's office, in pajamas, and holding a stuffed dinosaur. "Dad, why did Aunt Liv leave?" Victor pulled his son into his lap, searching for words that wouldn't hurt a child who had already lost too much. "Sometimes adults make mistakes, champ, and Aunt Liv needed to solve some problems." Is she coming back? The silence stretched too long. Did she lie about baby Michael? Asked Leo, and there was a terrible maturity in that small question. How do you know about that? I heard Aunt Sandra talking on the phone. She said that Aunt Liv lied, that the baby wasn't really yours. Victor felt anger rising in his throat. Sandra had promised to keep Leo out of it. The baby isn't mine biologically, no. But that doesn't mean that, just like I'm not Mommy's biological son? The question hit Victor like lightning. Leo had been informally adopted when Helen married Victor. His first wife had died in childbirth, and Helen had raised Leo as if he were her own son. It's different, Leo. Why? Because Aunt Liv is poor? The brutal innocence of the question left Victor speechless. Why was it different? Why was Helen's love for a son she hadn't born noble, while his for Michael was, what? Stupidity? Weakness? Meanwhile, across town, Liv faced her own torture. Rick had appeared at the motel with a temporary court order that gave him the right to supervised visitation. Look at you looking all cute, he said, taking Michael in his arms with the ease of someone who had never changed a diaper in his life. Daddy can finally meet his little man. You're not his father, said Liv through clenched teeth. You're just a sperm that accidentally arrived in the right place. Oh, that's mean. And here I am trying to rebuild our family. Rick smiled, but there was venom in his eyes. By the way, your child support proposal was rejected. Now I want $100,000 a month. I don't have $100,000 a month, but your ex-employer does, and I'm sure he'd rather pay to keep his name out of the newspapers than have to explain why he was financing the upbringing of another man's child. He doesn't even want to talk to me anymore. Even better, then you'll have to get the money yourself. Rick handed Michael back as if he were a toy he had grown tired of. You have until Friday. Otherwise, I'll file for full custody and allegation of parental abandonment. And then, my dear, you lose your son, and I get child support from the state. On Friday, Liv was at the entrance of the Caldwell Investments building, holding Michael and gathering courage that she didn't know if she had. The receptionist recognized her immediately. Who wouldn't recognize the woman from the newspapers, but was politely cold? Mr. Caldwell is not receiving visitors today. Please, it's about Leo. It's urgent. 5 minutes later, Sandra appeared in the lobby like a furious Valkyrie. How dare you show your face here after everything? I need to talk to Victor. You don't need anything from Victor. You need to get out of his life and never come back. Sandra approached, her voice low and venomous. You thought you could fool my family, that you could use a child to infiltrate our world. That's not what happened. No. Then explain to me how a woman who slept on the street managed to convince one of the most intelligent men in the country to raise another man's child as if it were his own. Because he loved me, Liv exploded, and I loved him. And Michael was our son in our hearts, even if he wasn't in our blood. Was? Sandra smiled cruelly. Interesting that you speak in the past tense, because Victor proposed to Camilla last night. They're getting married next month. Liv's world collapsed at once. She held Michael tighter, her legs weak. You're lying, am I? Then why doesn't he answer your calls? Why did he send the lawyers to resolve the issue of your severance pay? Sandra took an envelope out of her pocket. $500,000. Enough for you to start over far away from here, raise your son, forget that this family ever existed. Liv took the envelope with trembling hands. It was a lot of money, enough money to pay off Rick, to disappear, to raise Michael in peace. But it was also the price of her humiliation, the payment for her to disappear like a mistake that needed to be erased. He didn't even want to see me. Sandra hesitated for a second, then lied without batting an eye. He said it was the biggest disappointment of his life. That you made him an idiot, used his vulnerability, manipulated Leo. Her voice became more cruel. That he never wants to see you or that child again. Liv nodded slowly, feeling something die definitively inside her chest. Tell him that. That I understand. And that I'm sorry. For everything. She turned and left, knowing that she was leaving behind not only Victor, but also the only period of her life in which she had felt truly loved. On the 40th floor, Victor was looking out the window when Sandra returned. "She's gone," said his sister-in-law. "She took the money and left. You'll never be bothered again." Victor nodded, but his hands were shaking when he thought that he would never see Liv smile again, never hold Michael again, never be a family again. "Did I do the right thing?" he asked, more to himself. "You did," replied Sandra. "Helen would be proud." But Victor doubted it. Helen had loved Leo unconditionally, without caring about DNA or biology. She would have loved Michael too, and maybe she would never forgive him for letting fear and pride destroy the only chance of happiness he had found since her death. 2 weeks passed like a nightmare in slow motion. Liv had used part of the money to pay off Rick's blackmail and rent a small apartment in Queens, far enough from Greenwich to never run into Victor by chance, cheap enough so that the rest of the money would last at least a year. But the money didn't heal the pain of waking up every day, knowing that she had lost not only the man she loved, but also Leo, the boy who had become the son of her heart as much as Michael. She was feeding Michael a bottle on a rainy morning in August when the doorbell rang. Through the intercom, an unknown female voice. "Liv, my name is Carla Santos. I was married to Rick." Liv's blood ran cold. "Was married? Can I come up? I have some important things to tell you." 5 minutes later, a blonde woman in her mid-30s was sitting on the simple sofa in the living room, holding a cup of coffee with hands that were visibly shaking. "Rick died 3 days ago," she said without preamble. "Motorcycle accident. He was drunk as always." Liv felt a strange mixture of relief and shock. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He was a jerk." Carla drank her coffee and looked directly at Liv. "And I came here because I found some things that you need to know." She opened a large bag and took out a folder full of documents. "Rick was blackmailing you, right?" "How do you—" "Because he did that to everyone. It was the only way he could get money without working." Carla spread papers on the coffee table. "Look at this." They were emails. Dozens of emails between Rick and Sandra Caldwell. Liv read the first one with a racing heart. "Mrs. Caldwell, as we discussed, I have compromising information about your brother-in-law's relationship with my ex-girlfriend. I can help you resolve this inconvenient problem in exchange for financial compensation." "Oh my God," Liv whispered. They were working together. "Keep reading." The second email was even worse. "The paternity test you suggested was a good idea. I got the child's DNA according to your instructions. When we release the result, it will end any chance of her returning to your brother-in-law's life." Liv's hands were shaking so badly that she could barely hold the papers. "But the test. He said he was the father." "It was a lie. Rick had a fake test done with the DNA of another man." Carla took more papers out of her bag. "Here's the real result. Rick is not Michael's father." Liv looked at the official document, the words "paternity excluded" dancing in front of her. "Then who?" "I don't know, but I have a suspicion." Carla smiled for the first time since she arrived. "Rick was sterile, Liv, for 5 years. Testicular cancer. He could never be anyone's father." The world stopped. Liv looked at Michael sleeping in the crib, then at the papers scattered on the table, trying to process the magnitude of the conspiracy. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I also loved someone and lost him because of his lies." Carla leaned forward. "And because, rummaging through his things, I discovered that you weren't the only victim." She handed a pen drive to Liv. "It has everything here. Emails, call recordings, even videos of him telling his friends how he was making money sucking off the Caldwell magnate. There's even a recording of him laughing at how he managed to make you believe that he was the child's father." Liv took the pen drive as if it were a weapon. "There's one more thing," Carla said hesitantly. "Rick recorded a conversation with Sandra Caldwell. She said some things about Victor, about how he was suffering, how he never stopped loving you. He asked another woman to marry him." "Asked? Or was he forced?" Carla pointed to one of the emails. "Look at the date of this one. Sandra wrote to Rick on the same day you left the mansion. First phase completed. Now let's move on to the second part of the plan. Liv read the email with growing horror. Sandra detailed how she would convince Victor to marry Camilla, using the guilt about Leo and the company as leverage. They destroyed everything, she whispered. But you can rebuild, said Carla. With this evidence, you can show Victor the truth. He won't receive me. He thinks what Sandra wanted him to think. But what if he knew the truth? That night, Liv stayed up until 3 a.m, reading and rereading every document, every email, every proof of the conspiracy that had destroyed her family. Sandra had orchestrated everything with the precision of a general. First, she planted spies in the hospital to spread the first news. Then she contacted Rick, offering money in exchange for blackmail. When that wasn't enough to separate the couple, she escalated to the fake paternity test and the smear campaign in the media. But there was one thing that Sandra hadn't counted on: Liv discovering the truth. The next morning, she put on the only decent dress she owned, left Michael with the downstairs neighbor, a kind lady who had offered to help, and went to the office of Dr. Ellis, the Caldwell family lawyer. "I need to talk to you about Sandra Caldwell," she said to the receptionist. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but tell him I have information about blackmail and falsification of documents involving the family he represents." 15 minutes later, she was sitting in front of the man who had helped destroy her life. "Ms. Moore, I don't know what you intend to do with this, but I intend to show you that you were deceived, just as Victor was deceived, just as I was deceived." She placed the pen drive on the table. "Sandra Caldwell conspired with my ex-boyfriend to separate us. And I have proof." Dr. Ellis picked up the pen drive reluctantly, but as he opened the files on the computer, his expression changed from skepticism to shock, then to horror. "My God," he murmured after listening to one of the recordings. "Did Sandra really say that?" "She did, and she acted on it. The question is, are you going to continue to be an accomplice, or are you going to help fix the damage she caused?" Dr. Ellis was silent for long minutes, the computer screen reflecting in his glasses. "Victor is suffering," he said finally. "He doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep, he works 20 hours a day to avoid thinking. Leo cried for 3 days straight when he found out you weren't coming back. And yet he's going to marry someone else. He thinks he's doing what's best for his son. Sandra convinced him that you were an opportunist, that Leo needed stability." Dr. Ellis paused. "She even lied about your conversation in the building lobby, said you had admitted that you were using him." Liv felt anger rising in her throat like lava. "Where's the wedding?" "Tomorrow, at the chapel of the school where Leo studies. Sandra insisted it be quick and discreet to quell the scandal." "Then there's still time." Dr. Ellis looked at her with a strange expression, part admiration, part pity. "Liv, even if you prove that Sandra lied, that won't change the fact that Michael isn't Victor's son. Not his biological son," she corrected. "But Victor once told me that family is built with love, not with DNA, and that Leo was as much his son as if he had fathered him himself." She stood up, taking the pen drive. "Will you help me?" Dr. Ellis hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'll need a few hours to review everything and prepare the legal documentation. But yes, I think Victor deserves to know the truth before he commits the biggest mistake of his life." That afternoon, while Liv was planning how to interrupt a wedding, Victor was in the garden of the mansion, watching Leo playing listlessly with his dinosaurs. The boy had returned to the silence of the early years after his mother's death, and no new nanny could bring him back. "Dad," said Leo suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, champ. Do you still love Aunt Liv?" The question hit Victor like a punch to the stomach. He looked at his son, the big, sad eyes so similar to Helen's, but with a maturity that no child should have. "Why are you asking that?" "Because tomorrow you're going to marry Aunt Camilla, but every night I hear you crying in your room." Victor felt tears threatening. He had thought he was hiding his pain well. Sometimes adults do things they don't want to do because they think it's better for the people they love. Like Aunt Liv did when she left. The simple observation of a child carried a truth that Victor had refused to see. Liv hadn't run away. She had sacrificed her own happiness because she thought it was better for him, for Leo, for everyone. "Leo," he said slowly, "what would you do if you could choose?" The boy didn't hesitate. "I'd bring Aunt Liv back. And Michael, too. And we'd be a real family, just like in those days before she left." That night, Victor cancelled the wedding rehearsal dinner and stayed up until dawn, looking at photos of Liv on the phone that he hadn't been able to delete, and wondering if there was still time to correct the biggest mistake of his life. The chapel was decorated with white and gold flowers, a perfect setting for the wedding that was supposed to save the Caldwell family's reputation. The guests, 50 carefully selected people from New York City high society, whispered among themselves as they awaited the bride's entrance. Victor was before the altar, impeccable in his tuxedo but pale as wax. Beside him, Leo held the rings with an expression that mixed sadness and resignation, a child who had learned too early that we don't always get what we want. Sandra, sitting in the first row, smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had orchestrated everything perfectly. Camilla was beautiful, suitable, unquestionable. The scandal would be forgotten. Business would return to normal, and Victor would learn to be grateful for the salvation she had engineered. "Dearly beloved," began the priest, "we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of..." The doors of the chapel burst open with a bang. Liv entered like a storm, holding Michael in her arms and accompanied by Dr. Ellis, who carried a folder of documents. She was wearing the same dress from the day she had met Victor, the only decent one she owned, but carried a determination that made her look like a warrior. A shocked murmur swept through the chapel. Sandra stood up like a fury. "Security!" she shouted. "Get that woman out of here!" "Wait," said Victor, and his voice echoed through the church with an authority that silenced everyone. His eyes were fixed on Liv, and there was something in them that she couldn't decipher. Surprise, pain, hope. "Victor, don't be ridiculous," hissed Sandra. "She just wants to cause more scandal." "I want to tell the truth," said Liv, her voice trembling but firm. "The truth that you hid from him." She approached the altar, the guests muttering indignantly. Camilla, still holding the bouquet, looked between Liv and Victor with a growing understanding that she wasn't the only woman in the groom's heart. "Liv," said Victor softly, "what are you doing here? Preventing you from making the biggest mistake of your life." She looked around the chapel, then back at him. "Based on lies that I just discovered." Dr. Ellis stepped forward, opening the folder. "Victor, I need you to see this. We've uncovered a conspiracy involving your sister-in-law and Liv's ex-boyfriend. This is ridiculous." Sandra tried to intercept the documents. "Are you going to listen to this opportunist?" "Sandra," said Dr. Ellis coldly, "I suggest you be quiet before I call the police." He handed the pen drive to Victor. "Everything is here. Emails, recordings, evidence of blackmail and forgery. Your sister-in-law orchestrated everything to separate you." Victor took the pen drive with trembling hands, but before he could say anything, Leo broke free from the best man's hand and ran to Liv. "Aunt Liv!" he shouted, hugging her legs. "You're back!" "I'm back, my love," she said, kissing the top of his head, "and I'm never leaving again." "And Michael, is he my brother?" Liv looked at Victor, seeking permission, courage, some sign that there was still hope. "If your dad wants him to be," she said carefully. Victor approached, completely ignoring Camilla, the guests, the scandal he was causing. His eyes were fixed on the baby in Liv's arms. "He's grown," he said softly. 2 weeks is a long time in a baby's life. It's a long time in anyone's life. Michael chose that moment to open his eyes and look directly at Victor. A small, toothless smile spread across his little face, as if he recognized the man who had held him in the first days of his life. Daddy, said Leo, pulling on the hem of Victor's tuxedo. He remembers you. Rick wasn't the father, said Liv all at once, before she lost her courage. He never was. He was sterile, Victor. The paternity test was forged. It was all a plan by Sandra to separate us. The silence in the chapel was deafening. Victor looked at Sandra, who had paled completely. Is that true? He asked, his voice dangerously low. Victor, I was protecting you. True? Sandra raised her chin, defiant even in defeat. You were humiliating yourself over a woman who was worth nothing, compromising the future of Leo, the company, everything that Helen built with us. Helen loved unconditionally, said Victor, and there was a growing fury in his voice. She taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. And I chose Liv, I chose Michael, I chose to be happy, and you destroyed that. He turned to Liv, taking her free hand. Can you forgive me for having doubted, for having let them take me away from you, for almost having lost the chance to be Michael's father and your husband? Tears streamed down Liv's face. There's nothing to forgive. We were both deceived. Aunt Liv, interrupted Leo, does that mean you're going to marry Dad instead of Aunt Camilla? All eyes turned to Camilla, who was standing there still holding the bouquet, watching the man who was supposed to marry her ask another woman for forgiveness. Victor, she said dignifiedly, I think we all know that this wedding shouldn't happen anyway. She handed the bouquet to Liv with a sad but genuine smile. Take care of yourselves and be truly happy. Father, said Victor, still holding Liv's hand, could you, since we're all here and the flowers are already paid for. Victor Caldwell, said Liv, laughing through her tears, are you proposing to me at the altar in front of 50 people after I interrupted your wedding to another woman? I am. And I hope you say yes because Leo has already chosen the rings. Leo waved enthusiastically with the rings he was still holding. I chose them myself. They're special because they have room to engrave Forever Family inside. Liv looked around, at the shocked guests, at the furious Sandra being escorted out by security guards, at Dr. Ellis smiling for the first time in years, at Michael drooling happily on her shoulder, at Leo jumping with anxiety. Then she looked at Victor, the man who had saved her in a park, who had given her a home, who had loved her son as if he were his own, who had fought against his own family to protect them. Yes, she said. 1,000 times yes. The kiss that followed was intense, desperate, full of promises that they would never let themselves be separated again. The guests applauded, even those who were still in shock. Leo shouted with joy, and Michael laughed as if he understood that his family was finally complete. So, said the priest, still a little stunned by the turn of events, I guess we have a wedding to celebrate. 6 months later, in the Greenwich mansion, transformed into a real home, Victor arrived from work to find Liv in the garden, teaching Leo how to change diapers on Michael. Dad, shouted Leo, look how good I am at this. Michael didn't even cry. Impressive, champ, said Victor, kissing his son's head before leaning down to kiss his wife. How was the day? Perfect. Michael slept 4 hours straight, Leo got an A in math, and I found out something interesting. What? Liv smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat belly. That Michael is going to have a little brother or sister. Victor stared at her for a second in complete shock, then picked her up and twirled her around the garden, laughing like crazy. Really? Really? 2 months? Dad, why are you yelling? Asked Leo, appearing with Michael in his arms. Because we're going to have another baby in the family, champ. Leo considered this for a moment. Cool. That way I can teach both of them to like dinosaurs. That night, after the children were asleep, Victor and Liv stayed on the porch, watching the stars. Do you regret anything? She asked, nestled against his chest. That it took me so long to find you, that I let them almost separate us, that I wasted so much time being afraid. He kissed the top of her head. And you? Nothing, not even the bad parts, because they brought me to you. Michael started crying on the baby monitor, and Leo appeared in the doorway of the porch, half asleep. Can I go get him? I promise I'll be careful." "Of course, honey. But call us if you need anything." As Leo ran to get his brother, Liv turned in Victor's arms. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For saving me in that park, for giving me a family, for proving that happy endings really exist." "Thank you," he replied, "for teaching me that love doesn't need to make sense to everyone. It just needs to make sense to us." And when Leo returned with Michael in his arms, followed by 2 dogs they had adopted the week before, and they all snuggled together on the porch swing, Liv knew that she had found more than a happy ending. She had found a fresh start, a family built not of blood or conventions, but of daily choices to love, protect, and be present. And that, she discovered watching Victor tell dinosaur stories to Leo while Michael slept in his arms, was much more powerful than any fairy tale.